Hi everyone, welcome to WION. I'm Aisha Sindhu. We're continuing our coverage of the 9th BRICS Summit. The official welcome, of course, has already taken place in Xiamen in China today. The ceremony of the BRICS Summit witnessed BRICS leaders coming together. They were welcomed by the Chinese Premier Xi Jinping. This was, of course, a huge photo opportunity for the media as the BRICS leaders shook hands with one another, and in what can be termed a show of strength and unity by the leaders. That was all on display at the start of the plenary session in Xiamen. Prime Minister Narendra Modi on your screens right now, along with the Brazilian President Michel Temer, the South African President Jacob Zuma and the Russian President Vladimir Putin are all in China attending the summit. Their host is the Chinese President Xi Jinping. Now, the recent nuclear tests by North Korea is obviously going to be one of the major talking points at the summit, with world leaders coming forward to condemn the North for its 6th nuclear test. The Chinese president at the opening ceremony of the summit in Xiamen called for mutual trust between member countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. In his speech, he broadly focused on enhancing cooperation between the BRICS members. He also said that the construction of a tall building starts with a solid foundation. The BRICS group of emerging economies is expected to oppose trade protectionism during the summit. All right, joining me live on the broadcast to talk more about what's going down in Xiamen is my colleague Ramesh Ramachandran. He's in the thick of it in Xiamen itself. In the studio with me is WION senior editor Surya Gangadharan. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you both for being here. Ramesh, to you first. Just going back to the 8th edition of the BRICS Summit that took place in Goa last year, there was a declaration that was signed. All right, I'm being told Ramesh is going to join us in just a second. Remember, the plenary session has started in Xiamen. The media, of course, getting a great photo opportunity, especially with Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Xi Jinping there shaking hands. Lots of optics on display, Surya. But going beyond optics, last year there was a declaration that was signed, and of course the usual suspects made their way into that declaration in terms of mutual cooperation, looking at the United Nations as the one international body that has the rights of determining principles and rules of international law. Does it all just come down to a lot of talk, a lot of saying the right sort of things at these platforms, but when it comes down to actual on-the-ground stuff, it really doesn't sort of follow suit?
Well, I think a lot of diplomacy and is tied up in such jargon and language, and it's required to be done to show how your peaceful intentions, how positive you are, and to reassure the world, But at the end of the day, China says that and also does what it wants in the South China Sea.
Absolutely.
And it does the same with Mongolia. It uses its economic leverage, as you were mentioning earlier, threatening this and that and the rest to get them in line as far as the Dalai Lama is concerned. And China is using its economic leverage in every manner possible. Giving loans, like in Sri Lanka, they're so indebted now they can't even repay.
Absolutely. And that's a big concern for India, looking at the region. I mean, Bhutan, for instance, in this entire India-China standoff, Bhutan emerged as a very strategic partner for India. In Nepal as well, the fact that Nepal's relationship with China is growing strong, and of course there's the all-weather ally in Pakistan. So does India also find itself let's say, cornered in by the Chinese influence in the South Asia region?
I'll give you an indication of how the Chinese see us. We've all read those reports about the Chinese offering Bhutan $10 billion.
Right.
$10 billion. How much have they actually invested in India in all these years? Less than 5. So it tells you how they see, and the buzz we get, the word we get, is that they've advised their companies to invest in India less, because then it will only build India up and India will challenge China more. So I don't know how true this is, but this is some of the things that are going around, And it tells you how the Chinese see and play great power politics. They want to remain on top. They know they have issues with India. India is perhaps the only rival they have in Asia. And they need to ensure that India doesn't get together with other countries like Japan, for instance, middle powers like South Korea, Australia, and challenge China in this part of the world. So they will play their game deftly. They will try and use whatever leverage they have, whether in terms of their economic heft, or when it comes to that, they will threaten, intimidate as they did in Doklam.
Absolutely.
Whichever works, whichever works.
Do you feel China has received some sort of indication that India, India of the past, there was an outreach towards countries like the US, to Russia, but ever since Prime Minister Modi's whole look east policy has come into play, last year at the BRICS summit, the BIMSTEC countries were invited as well. So there is a regional strengthening that's been taken on by India on a war footing. Is China very aware of that?
Oh, absolutely. If you look at SAARC, why has India gone towards BIMSTEC? Because SAARC is going nowhere. But I think there are also limitations with BIMSTEC, because you now have Nepal and perhaps even Bhutan objecting to transport corridors coming up in their territories. So these issues will keep on coming up. You have to find ways to get round and negotiate. India's problem is that we don't have the kind of money and the reserves that China has.
Right.
We have technologies, but we're not being able to put them together and get them to work in a sustained and coherent manner to deliver, You can promise anything, but at the end of the day, people there are looking for delivery. What are you giving them at the end of the day? Our projects take time, our cooperation is there, but our goodwill is there, but by the time we deliver on a project, it takes a decade or more. Who's going to wait these days?
It's a long walk down the red carpet when it comes to India. All right, Ramesh Ramachandran joining us on the broadcast live from Xiamen as well. Ramesh, we've been talking since 7 a.m. It's been 48 minutes since we've gotten into this conversation about the BRICS summit. And the one word that keeps coming up, it is China. And not just because China is the host country this time around, but I think China is facing a great degree of critique. It's being looked at with a very sharp focus. Does China find itself battling perhaps more issues than it had expected to as the host country of the BRICS summit this time around?
Indeed, the twin issues of the Doklam standoff and the North Korean nuclear test could not have come at a more inopportune time for China, coming as it did either ahead of the BRICS summit or on the day yesterday when the actual summit commenced. So clearly China has too many challenges on its hand at the moment as we speak. But that said, there's another facet or dimension to this whole debate and narrative and discourse, Aisha, and that is that China's so-called peaceful rise has upset and antagonized, rubbed countries in the neighborhood the wrong way, be it in South Asia or Southeast Asia. So China faces a dual challenge of how to win friends and influence people or countries going forward. And that, to my mind, is a key challenge for the government in China today and for the foreseeable future as well, given China's propensity or proclivity to rub countries the wrong way, especially, for instance, the South China Sea issue or on the Doklam standoff. China, and according to many Indian commentators back home in New Delhi, China may continue to probe India at several locations along the line of control. That is about 4,000-kilometer long line of control that separates India from Tibet and China. And also on other, third countries for that matter, for argument's sake, it could be a new theater, as it were, of India-China confrontation. So clearly, tomorrow's meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping will be very important. It will set the tone, the pace, as it were, for future relations, future interactions between India and China. And India will be looking forward to come to some sort of a modicum of understanding, or modus vivendi, so that India and China relations stay or maintain on an even keel and do not get distracted by such events and occurrences.
Absolutely. How to win friends and continue down the path of global domination. That could well be the title of China's new book, Surya. But speaking of this meeting between India and China tomorrow, everyone's talking about it and we will have to look at it as well. this whole idea of even keel, there can't be two big brothers in the same region, right? I mean, it's never happened. It's like, who emerges as the alpha male? And what exactly does India need to do to ensure that, if not, emerging as the dominant power, it maintains its stature when compared to China, looking at the global shifts that you've been talking about?
No, let's get one thing straight. There is a huge asymmetry between China and India.
Right.
Whether in terms of economy, in trade, in military terms, it's huge. And we know that. We know we can't compete with China on those areas. But we will not be pushed around. So that's something the Chinese have to learn. I think Doklam demonstrated, perhaps for the first time, that we will not be pushed around. Has that lesson gone down well? Maybe not. But in that sense, what Prime Minister Modi and President Xi talk about later today, it will be on broad lines. The details will have to be hammered out at the lower levels. It's also about whether China is prepared to live up to its commitments. Like I mentioned, we have any number of agreements with the Chinese on keeping border disputes, peaceful, ensuring tranquility on the borders. Yet these incidents keep recurring, And we've seen so many videos of push and shove going on in various parts. As long as the border is not defined and the Chinese are not willing to settle, we'll have an issue there. These transgressions will continue, tensions will keep rising. So at some point, I think it has to be made clear to the Chinese that you guys are not doing enough and we need to settle down and work it out on the maps. They have not given us the maps. They're the way they see their border, in all these years. That's an interesting point.
In fact, one of the press conferences that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs had held during this entire Doklam standoff mentioned the Xi dynasty from way back when, and borders decided along that side. So in some ways, I suppose, Surya, India knows what it's dealing with. There's not going to be any sort of clarification or writing down of the border, where the border is. There's not going to be an exchange of maps. So I'm assuming that that's not going to happen, at least in our lifetimes, in which case India really knows what it's dealing with already, because I don't see the situation changing dramatically in the years to come. So in many ways, that's a positive for India. They know how to deal with China already, and Doklam perhaps has been the best litmus test in some ways for India and how to determine its policy towards China in the future.
Doklam was a test, yes. But it was also different because we were intervening for a third country.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what possibly upset the Chinese so much. A bilateral thing is okay, we do it all the time. But for India to go across to the other side and tell the Chinese back off, and do the kind of thing that we did with them, that was something which has really got the Chinese. So it remains to be seen how they're going to, are we going to find more pinpricks along other tri-junctions where we have issues? In northern Myanmar, there is a tri-junction with India, China is also present, and that border with Myanmar is not demarcated. So there is an issue there. Then there's Kala Pani, which Nepal keeps raising,
Right.
So these are all sensitive tri-junctions. We need to settle these areas quickly in terms of demarcating the border, who owns what, and it's a very small slivers of territory. It can easily be resolved,
Right.
But we need to do it quickly because the Chinese will not let grass go under their feet.
But then, when you say we need to do it quickly, if you look at India in itself, Prime Minister Modi's got his next test coming up in 2019.